Okay, another area that we're going to look at very briefly, because you'll probably be familiar with this kind of system from pretty much all Windows applications, so it's not something that we really have to dwell upon here, is the menu system. In the menu system, for instance, we have the file menu, where you can create a new scene, reset your scene as you go back to a basic empty scene, open a file, open a recent file, save a file out, save a file out as something, you know, with a different name, save a copy of the file, xref objects, merge objects, blah 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 blah. There's lots of different options there that are all related to files. In edit we have undo selection, as I said, which is basically the equivalent of pressing this button here. Redo, hold, fetch. Hold and fetch basically do a very quick save of your scene to a standardized file with a standardized name, and it's a very quick way of doing a sort of permanent undo, I suppose. If you reach a point, you're working on a file and you're happy with the way it's going, and you're worried that at some point, you know, Macs may crash or something may happen, you know, accidents do happen, then you can use the hold function, and it'll quickly save out the file, and then later if you want to go back to that state, you can click on fetch and it'll load up the file and you can carry on working from that save state. So quite a useful tool there. Delete, not very useful because you can just use the delete key, and that's probably much more intuitive. Clone, you can use Control V to clone objects, or you can use other interface methods for that. Select all, select none, select invert, select by the color of an object, the name of an object, rectangular region. You got the different region options here from the marquee menu that I showed you earlier, those options. Then you have tools. There are various tools. You've got mirror, array. Again, these tools are shown up here. They're mirrored, you know, if you excuse the replication of the term, in other parts of the user interface. Snapshot, spacing tool, normal align, align to camera, align to view. Again, these are all replicated over here, as I've just said. Rename objects, assign vertex colors, color clipboard, which was a utility that I showed you earlier. Grab a viewport, measure distance, channel info, various tools there from other parts of the user interface. Then you have groups, which is something which aren't really that used that much these days. They're similar. They're kind of hierarchy. Basically, they allow you to take, say, 4 teapots. You create a group. There we are. We'll call it group 1, and now the teapots are treated as one object. The problem with the groups is that they can lead to various problems with transforms, and in general it's probably not a good idea to actually create groups. It's actually a much better idea to create a helper and then link the 4 teapots to the helper, and then if you want to rotate all the teapots at the same time, you actually rotate the helper rather than using groups. So we'll go here and we'll ungroup those teapots, and they're not a group anymore. You've got views, various tools for changing your views. You can change your viewport background, show ghosting, show key times, shade selected objects. So as I said, various tools there for modifying the way the viewports work. Then you've got a creation menu, and this pretty much mirrors the creation panel, which we went through earlier. So you've got creation options for standard primitives, extended primitives, AC objects, compound particles, patch grids, and so forth. You've got all the creation options there. So if you can't find something in the command panel, then you can always go to the create menu and find it here instead. We have a similar menu for modifiers, so you've got all the modifiers separated out into different sections based on the type of modifier, and as you can see, they're ghosted out if they're not actually applicable. And as we have nothing selected at the moment, nothing's applicable. So let's select a teapot, and some of these will become, there we are, they're now applicable. Character. This allows you to create a character set, which is something that we probably go into on another DVD. Insert a character from another file. bone tools, which allow you to modify bones after you've created them. Set skin pose, assume skin pose. These are used by the character rig. Then we have reactor. This basically allows you to set up objects for dynamic simulation using the Max reactor system. Animation, which is quite an important menu in some ways. There are options which aren't really available elsewhere in Max. Here you can set up an IK solver solution for a bone chain, which is something which we'd go into on a different DVD on animation, say. You have constraints. You can constrain an object to another object. For instance, you can make one object look at another object. I'll quickly show you how that works. There are different types of constraints, but in this case we'll go to animation constraints, look at constraint, and we'll make this teapot look at this teapot here. There we go. The pivot has been offset, so it's a little bit wonky, but if I move this teapot around, you can see that the teapot has been constrained to look at it, so it always looks at the other teapot. As you can imagine, the look at constraint is very useful for doing characters' eyes. You can constrain them, constrain them to two helpers in front of the eyes, and then each eye will look at each helper. You can constrain those two helpers to a third helper, and then you can move those around, and that will stop the character, for instance, going cockeyed. If you had a look at constraint on both eyeballs and they looked at one helper, if you put the helper too close to the eyeballs, the character will actually go cockeyed, as I just said. So it's usually a good idea to constrain the eyes to two helpers and do it using that method. You've got options here to change the controllers. You can choose different types of controllers. Add custom attributes, which are very useful for rigging characters. They're basically, as you can see, each one of these teapots has got attributes. For instance, they've got an angle or a direction. That's because each one of them has got a bend modifier on. And you can see angle and direction, they're both attributes, but let's say you needed a new attribute which you wanted to use to control a character's stride length or a character's color of its hair. Well, using custom attributes, which you can apply here, you can put that onto the object, and then you can use that to control other aspects of the character. Wire parameters, which will then allow you to wire, for instance, the angle parameter that I mentioned over here. You could wire that up to the custom parameter. So there you go, you could wire those together if you wanted those, and control the angle using the custom attribute instead of using the actual parameter here. You can make a preview of the animation that you've already produced, view the preview, or rename the preview. So, you know, some little tools there for working with animation. You've got graph editors here, where you can look at track view, which is for animating. Track view dope sheet, which is a different type of track view, where all the keys are shown as little discrete points, which is much more useful for when you're working with lots of animation keys. You can create a new track view, delete a track view, save a track view out for later use in the same file. You can create a new schematic view, delete the schematic view, or save a schematic view. And again, these two options are mirrored here on the main toolbar. To the right of graph editors, we have the rendering menu. The first item in the rendering menu is render. This brings up the render dialog, where you can set up various parameters for obviously rendering. In version 6 of Max, the render dialog was broken up into various tabs, so now you can address various elements of a renderer from these different tabs. When you assign a different renderer, different tabs will become available. So this dialog actually changes quite a lot if you're using Mental Ray or the standard scanline renderer, or for instance if you have V-Ray, Brazil, or Final Render installed. These different tabs will change to offer you the various elements of those renderers. Below render you have environment. This dialog is used to use an environment map, for instance, or to change the background color of a render. You can change the lighting tint of the entire scene, or the ambient color. Here you've got exposure control, so you can actually do a render and then control the intensity of the